You know, love, true enduring love, isn't just some whimsical feeling. It's not just the flutter in your chest or the rush of dopamine when you meet someone new. Love is something far more profound. It's commitment. It's sacrifice. It's willingly binding yourself to the chaos of another person because you've seen the good in them, and more importantly, because you've decided to aim together towards something higher. But then, over time, something changes, and it's subtle, insidious. You don't even see it at first. It's not a slammed door or a loud fight. It's in the silence. It's in the pause before they say, I love you, as if they're searching for the words. It's when shared laughter starts to feel forced. When conversations that once stretched into the night shrink into transactional exchanges about chores or schedules or logistics. That's the first sign. Then comes the withdrawal of attention, not out of cruelty, but apathy. The phone becomes more interesting than your presence. The gaze that once lingered now flits away. And it's not that they don't care about anything, it's that they've stopped caring about you specifically. Not maliciously, but because their attention has shifted. And attention, well, that's love's currency. They stop fighting, too. Not because everything is fine, but because they no longer believe it's worth the effort. Conflict, ironically, is a sign of investment. When someone argues, it's often because they still care enough to fight for something better. But when the fighting stops, when complaints turn into indifference, that's a deeper threat. You may see it in how they stop making plans that include you, how the future becomes their future, not your shared one. You'll hear I where there used to be we. That's not semantics, that's psychology unraveling the bond. And what do you do in the face of that? Do you become angry, desperate? Do you try to rekindle what once was with performative affection or emotional bargaining? No, that's not the answer. The answer, as always, lies in confronting the truth, no matter how painful. You ask, what has changed? And what is my role in that change? Because love isn't something you have, it's something you do. And if it's fading, you damn well better look at how your actions or your inactions have contributed. It's not about blame, it's about responsibility. And maybe, just maybe, if both people are willing to do that, the descent into apathy can be reversed. But it starts with honesty. Brutal, unwavering honesty. Because that's the only way to salvage something real. The first signs that someone is falling out of love are rarely dramatic. They don't arrive with a slammed door or a shouted insult. Instead, they slip in quietly, unnoticed, like a change in the wind. They take the shape of small silences, of pauses that linger a little too long, of glances that no longer meet in the same familiar way. The slow unraveling of affection often begins in the spaces where words once lived. And if you're not paying close attention, you'll miss them entirely. Until one day you realize that something vital has gone missing. The first is a love match, and the inclination toward energy and love becomes almost electric. Every word spoken carries weight. Every glance feels charged. You notice everything. The way they laugh, the way they walk, the way they reach for your hand when they think you're not looking. There's an attentiveness, a kind of shared presence that reinforces the bond between two people. Love at that stage feels alive because both individuals are fully engaged in the dance of connection. But when someone begins to fall out of love, this engagement begins to deteriorate. The first and most telling sign is the erosion of that once constant presence. They're still there physically. They still smile, still respond to your questions, still go through the motions, but their responses grow shorter. The space between texts gets longer. The enthusiasm in their voice begins to wane. Conversations that used to stretch long into the night begin to end before they've even begun. These moments are so quiet, so seemingly insignificant that they can be easy to rationalize or ignore. You might tell yourself, they're just tired, that they've had a long day, that it's a phase. And maybe sometimes that's true. But if the distance persists, if the silences become a pattern rather than an exception, you have to ask yourself what they really signify. One of the most powerful indicators of connection in a relationship is the willingness to share one's inner world. In love, people open up. They expose their vulnerabilities, dreams, and fears. They want to be seen and understood, and they seek that mutual recognition. When love begins to fade, that openness often closes down. What was once a space of shared emotion becomes a quiet void. They stop telling you about their day. Or when they do, it's stripped of detail, offered more out of habit than desire. The emotional color is gone, replaced by neutral tones. And you start to feel like you're talking to a version of them that's been edited, compared down, distanced. The silence isn't just the absence of words, it's the absence of intimacy. It's the slow retreat of their emotional presence. Where they once leaned in, now they lean back. Where there was once curiosity about your thoughts and feelings, now there's indifference. They don't ask as many questions. They don't remember the little things you told them last week. And it's not because they don't have the capacity, it's because the desire to engage has faded, often without them even realizing it. Love doesn't usually end with a bang. It's a gradual fading, a quiet uncoupling that begins long before either person consciously admits what's happening. The silence is deceptive because it doesn't demand attention. It just settles in. And unless one is brave enough to confront it, to speak directly into that growing void, it continues to grow. Attention is not just a casual part of love. It is the very foundation that sustains it. In fact, you could say that love is largely made up of where we choose to direct our attention. The presence or absence of attention is not simply a reflection of how we feel. It shapes how we feel. It reinforces emotional connection, nurtures intimacy, and affirms value in the relationship. So when someone begins to fall out of love, one of the first signs is that their attention drifts elsewhere, not always in large, noticeable ways, but in dozens of small moments that quietly add up.
In the early stages of a relationship, attention is abundant. It's natural, even involuntary. You find yourself completely absorbed by the other person. Their voice, their mannerisms, their stories. You remember the things they say, you notice when something's bothering them, and you seek out opportunities to connect. You're attentive to their needs, their moods, and the little details that make them unique. This kind of focused attention is not just romantic. It's an emotional signal that says, you matter to me. I see you. I'm here with you. But when someone begins to detach emotionally, their attention shifts. You might still be in the same room together, but their mind is elsewhere. Their eyes glaze over during conversations, or they glance at their phone while you're talking. Responses become more distracted, more surface level. It's not necessarily malicious, but it is telling. You feel the difference because attention is a form of validation. When it's withheld, it creates a subtle but growing sense of disconnection. You might notice that they stop noticing you in the way they used to. They forget things you told them, even when those things were important to you. They don't ask how your day went, or if they do, it's a habitual question that doesn't lead anywhere. Their interest seems performative at best, mechanical at worst. You feel like you're speaking into a void, and that emptiness becomes emotionally exhausting. Attention, when absent, becomes a form of emotional neglect. People often think love is about grand gestures, but it's sustained through small, consistent acts of focus. A glance, a thoughtful question, a memory recalled at the right moment. These are not just niceties, they are signals of presence, of commitment, of care. When these disappear, even if everything else in the relationship seems stable on the surface, the underlying connection begins to erode. You also begin to see this shift in the way they prioritize their time. Someone who is emotionally engaged will make space for the person they love. They'll show up not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. But when they're falling out of love, suddenly there's always something more pressing. Work, friends, hobbies, screen time. It's not that those things weren't always there. It's that your place in the hierarchy of their attention has changed. This shift can feel especially confusing because the person may still claim to care. They may even believe that they do. But attention doesn't lie. You can't fake presence. You can't fake truly listening. And the lack of attention doesn't just make you feel less loved, it makes you question your own significance in their life. You begin to wonder if you're being unreasonable, if you're imagining things, if maybe you're the one who changed. But deep down, you sense what's happening. You feel it in the moments when you speak and they don't look up. When you share something meaningful and they barely react. When you realize they haven't really seen you in weeks, even though you've been right there the entire time. Conflict in a relationship is often misunderstood. People tend to see fighting as a bad sign, something to be avoided or feared. But the reality is more complex. Conflict, when approached constructively, is a form of engagement. It shows that both people still care enough to confront issues, to argue for something better, to fight for what matters. The presence of conflict in many cases is actually a sign that love is still active. Imperfect, perhaps, but alive. It's when conflict disappears, when disagreements give way to indifference, that the situation becomes truly dangerous. The absence of conflict doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means resignation. It means one or both partners no longer see the point in trying. When someone is falling out of love, they often begin to withdraw emotionally. This withdrawal can be subtle at first. They stop pushing back. They stop voicing their opinions. They stop correcting misunderstandings or defending themselves when they feel hurt. On the surface, this might appear as maturity or patience, but beneath it, something has changed. What once would have sparked a passionate response now meets only silence. The energy that used to go into arguing, questioning, and trying to be understood fades away, and in its place comes a cold sort of stillness. This kind of indifference is deeply unsettling. It can feel more painful than the loudest argument because it signals a lack of emotional investment. Arguments may be exhausting, but they are often rooted in a desire to connect, to repair, to realign, to be seen and heard. When that desire disappears, when neither person bothers to speak up or push back, it's often because they no longer believe it's worth the effort. That belief is a profound shift, and it often marks the beginning of emotional detachment. Indifference creeps in through small daily interactions. There's less eye contact, less checking in, fewer questions like, "Are you okay?" or "What's bothering you?" You may notice that you're the only one initiating conversations about the relationship, or maybe you both avoid those conversations altogether because they now feel futile. The unspoken agreement becomes, it's easier not to care too much. That way you don't get disappointed. That way you don't have to deal with the mess. This emotional distance is not always deliberate. Sometimes it happens gradually. A series of unresolved issues builds up over time, and eventually one or both partners stop believing that things can improve. They grow tired of the cycle, talking, arguing, reconciling, only to find themselves back in the same place weeks later. So they check out. They stop trying. They let things slide. And what's left is a kind of emotional vacancy that is far more damaging than any heated dispute. There's also a protective instinct behind this withdrawal. When people no longer feel safe or valued in a relationship, they may retreat into themselves as a way to avoid pain. Indifference becomes a shield. It keeps them from being hurt, but it also shuts out any chance of genuine connection. I tease a numbness that settles over the relationship, a quiet disengagement that can be difficult to reverse. The danger lies in mistaking this quiet for stability. Just because no one is yelling doesn't mean everything is fine. In fact, it can mean that both people have given up. They may still be going through the motions, sharing a home, attending events, saying "I love you" out of habit, but emotionally, they've already begun to separate. They've stopped turning toward each other in moments of stress or uncertainty. They've stopped fighting not because they've resolved their issues, but because they've stopped believing that resolution is even possible. Gathering is one of the most revealing indicators of emotional connection. The words people choose, often unconsciously, reflect how they see themselves in relation to others. In a loving relationship, language tends to center around togetherness. Words like "we," "us," and "ours" dominate conversations because the couple sees their lives as intertwined. There's a shared identity, a sense of unity that goes beyond individual goals or preferences. When that emotional bond begins to fray, the language changes. It becomes more individualistic. We slowly turns into I, and that subtle shift speaks volumes about where the relationship is heading. At first, it might be something as minor as how plans are discussed. Instead of saying, where should we go this weekend, it becomes, I'm thinking of going here. The shift is easy to miss, but it signals a change in mindset. The person is no longer instinctively considering the relationship as the default context for their decisions. Instead, they are beginning to think in terms of their own separate path. This doesn't necessarily mean they're acting selfishly. It often happens without conscious intent, but it reflects a psychological distancing, a retreat into individual identity where once there was shared identity. This change in language often correlates with changes in how people view the future. In a connected, emotionally secure relationship, the future is imagined together. Conversations revolve around shared goals, where we want to live, what we want to achieve, how we will navigate life's challenges. But when someone begins to fall out of love, those shared visions fade. Suddenly, the future is described in personal terms. I want to travel more, or I need to focus on my career right now. These statements may be entirely valid on their own, but within the context of a relationship, they can signal emotional disengagement, especially if they consistently exclude the other person. Even day-to-day conversations reflect this shift. The person might begin to express preferences or opinions without regard for how they affect the relationship. I don't like doing that, or I need more space, becomes the norm. While expressing individual needs is healthy, what's different in this context is the lack of consideration for how those needs intersect with the partnership. It's not the assertion of individuality that's concerning, it's the absence of relational thinking. The shift from we to I is not just a linguistic change, it's a reorientation of the self within the relationship. In healthy love, there's a balance between maintaining personal identity and investing in the shared connection. When that balance tips too far toward independence without mutual discussion or adaptation, it can indicate that the emotional investment in the relationship is waning. The person is beginning to see themselves as separate, not just in terms of physical space or preferences, but in emotional alignment and long-term vision. You may also notice that when problems arise, the framing becomes more accusatory or detached. Instead of "we're having a hard time," it becomes "you're making things difficult for me." This language signals a breakdown in shared responsibility. The struggle is no longer seen as something to be navigated together. It's externalized and blamed. This approach distances the speaker emotionally and removes the sense of partnership that is essential for problem solving in relationships. Even affectionate language can become more generic. Terms of endearment fade, inside jokes or shared expressions disappear. The uniqueness of the connection begins to erode. Language that once created closeness now maintains distance. Words become practical rather than intimate, informative rather than emotional. Communication becomes more transactional, less tender, and increasingly self-centered. What once was a dialogue of unity becomes a monologue of separation, hinting at an inner shift that is quietly reshaping the foundation of the relationship. When a relationship begins to falter, the instinctive response for many people is to look outward. They search for blame. It's easier to point the finger, to catalog the ways their partner has changed or failed, than it is to reflect inward. But blame rarely leads to healing. In fact, it often deepens the divide. What's far more productive, though much harder, is to take responsibility. Not in the sense of taking all the fault, but in the sense of owning your role, your behavior, your contributions, and your neglects. Love is not a static possession. It's an active, living process that requires attention, effort, and humility from both partners. When that process begins to break down, it is rarely the result of one person alone. Blame focuses on what the other person failed to do. Responsibility focuses on what you could have done differently and still can. Taking responsibility also means recognizing the small, day-to-day ways that connection is either nurtured or neglected. Relationships are made of habits, how you greet each other, how you handle disagreement, how you express gratitude or affection. When love begins to fade, it's often not because of one dramatic betrayal, but because those small acts of care start disappearing. You stop saying thank you, you stop asking how their day went, you stop showing interest, and then one day you wake up and realize the intimacy has vanished. Taking responsibility means noticing those patterns and being willing to change them, even if the other person doesn't immediately respond in kind. It's also important to recognize that responsibility doesn't mean blame, shame, or self-condemnation. It's not about punishing yourself for what's gone wrong. It's about choosing to see clearly. Love deteriorates in the absence of awareness. People drift apart not always because they stop loving each other, but because they stop noticing each other. They stop investing in the relationship. They assume love will sustain itself, but it won't. Like anything valuable, it demands regular tending. Responsibility is a willingness to step up and do that work even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. This mindset is crucial not just for the survival of a relationship, but for your own growth. When you practice responsibility, you begin to understand the dynamics of love on a deeper level. You stop waiting for the other person to fix things or to be different. You start asking what you can do, how you can show up better. And even if the relationship ultimately doesn't survive, that shift changes you. It makes you more aware, more capable, more grounded. You learn not just how to love, but how to be loving consistently and intentionally. The truth is, everyone has blind spots. Everyone fails in small ways that over time add up. Maybe you stopped affirming your partner. Maybe you let resentment take root instead of communicating openly. Maybe you allow stress or routine to dull your affection. These things are common, and they don't make you a bad partner, but they do make a difference. When you accept responsibility, you begin to reverse those patterns. You begin to re-engage, to notice, to participate in the relationship as an active force instead of a passive observer. This shift isn't easy. It requires vulnerability, courage, and emotional maturity. But it's the only way real change becomes possible. Radical honesty is one of the most challenging and transformative elements in any relationship. It's not simply about telling the truth, it's about revealing what is deeply true inside you, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it risks upsetting the delicate balance of the relationship. Most people avoid radical honesty because it feels dangerous. It threatens the illusion of harmony. It calls into question the routines, the unspoken agreements, the silent compromises that have kept the relationship functioning on the surface. But when love begins to fade, radical honesty becomes not only necessary, it becomes the only path forward. It begins with the courage to name what's happening, to say out loud, something feels different, or I don't feel as connected as I used to. These words are heavy, but they cut through the fog of avoidance. They pull the relationship out of autopilot and force both people to confront the reality of their emotional landscape. Without this confrontation, distance continues to grow in silence. Both partners may feel the shift but remain too afraid to speak it, fearing that doing so will cause more harm. But in truth, it's the silence that does the damage. Radical honesty is not what breaks relationships. It's what exposes what is already breaking. It also requires looking inward before speaking outward. It means asking yourself, what have I been holding back? What truths have I buried to avoid conflict? What feelings have I dismissed as unimportant? Often the things we hide are not malicious or dramatic. They are the quiet disappointments, the unmet needs, the simmering doubts. We push them aside, hoping they will resolve themselves, but they don't. They become resentment, they become emotional distance. Radical honesty calls on us to unearth those buried truths, to speak them with clarity and compassion, and to invite our partner into that space of vulnerability. The practice of radical honesty is not only about revealing dissatisfaction, it's also about expressing desire. To say, I want to feel close to you again, or I miss how we used to laugh together, is just as important as naming what feels wrong. Honesty must include the full spectrum of emotion, not just frustration or pain, but longing and hope. This kind of truth-telling creates space for reconnection. It opens a dialogue instead of a blame game. It invites both people to step out from behind their defenses and meet each other as they really are in the present moment. This level of honesty also reveals character. It shows whether the relationship has the capacity to grow or whether it is built on avoidance and illusion. Some relationships falter under the weight of truth because they were sustained only by what was unspoken. Others emerge stronger because the truth, even when painful, becomes a foundation for rebuilding. Honesty tests the strength of the bond, shows whether the love was real or whether it was a convenient fiction maintained by fear and habit. But honesty, to be effective, must be coupled with responsibility and empathy. Speaking your truth is not a license to wound or accuse. It's an act of courage that must be matched by an equal act of listening. When both people commit to radical honesty, they create a space where change is possible. They stop pretending, they stop performing, they stop hoping the other will magically understand. Instead, they begin to communicate not just to be heard, but to be known. This process is often messy, often frightening, but it is also the most human thing we can do. It reintroduces authenticity into a dynamic that has become rigid or stale. It reawakens emotional presence. It brings the hidden fears and hopes into the light where they can finally be addressed. In the end, radical honesty is not just a tool for salvaging a relationship. It's the foundation upon which all deep connections are built. It forces both partners to step outside of their comfort zones to confront the reality of where they are and where they want to go. It is through this raw, open dialogue that true healing and growth can occur. The relationship, if both are willing, can be rebuilt from a place of truth rather than sustained by silence or avoidance. It requires vulnerability, patience, and a willingness to face discomfort. But in doing so, it offers the possibility of a renewed bond, one that is more resilient, more authentic, and more deeply rooted in mutual understanding.